So thank you everybody, and I think that I want to start before starting. I just want to read this because I don't know if you might have missed it. It would be just a shame, and you have it in the booklet as well, because I think it's kind of an inspiration. So it says, the first quote says, "Wherever men and women are condemned to live in extreme poverty, human rights are violated. To come together to ensure that these rights be respected is our solemn duty." And this is a saying by Joseph Raczynski, who is the founder of ATD Fourth World Movement, which is an international volunteer movement that works to eradicate poverty or fight poverty. And the second quote is by Michal Krumer-Nevo, who is professor in New York. And she says, "Today we find ourselves in a political period of urgency and despair." She wrote it 10 years ago or 12 years ago. It was published, but it's not, it's just becoming worse and worse. Yeah. The academy remains one of the few remaining spaces within which dissent is possible. Here, social critique and outrage are recognized as forms of knowledge. Inquiry is valued as oxygen for democratic sustenance. Collaborations are possible and necessary for sustained global movements of resistance. So I think that we might, just remember it when we start. So I felt so nervous before today, and I didn't really know why exactly. Whether it is because I have to clean the house very, very well, or because I have to write a good presentation, So I think that the house is cleaner than the presentation. But anyhow, I'll try, okay? So I'll read it, okay? In order, we could just, yeah. So I'm very excited to see you all here. I'm reading from what, I wrote. The PAP, the poverty-aware paradigm, is a true collaboration between academy and real life, and the people around this table represent this collaboration. Senior scholars and yet to be senior scholars, I'm talking about all my PhD students and all the social workers, activists that are here, as well as senior representatives of the Israeli Ministry of Labor, Social Affairs and Social Services, social workers and social activists. All of you are working with and for people in poverty. Many of you are deeply involved in PAP. I want to say so much, but I'll try to focus on 4 topics. First, I'll outline the paradigm's premises. Second, I'll briefly describe the process of developing the paradigm before 2014, when the welfare ministry came into the picture. Third, I will say a few words about its current status since 2014 and on the organizational model of PAP as it has been applied in the ministry's programs. Fourth, I'll talk about the current challenges and questions we're facing. By putting these 4 topics together, I hope to form a contextual framework for our discussions here in the coming 3 days. Okay? So, let's start. So in order to clarify what the paradigm is all about, I'll outline its premises very, very briefly. The paradigm stems from a critique of the semi-technical and mechanistic nature of social work interventions that serve the development of the profession as depoliticized activity. The structure of the paradigm enables us to connect theory and research with values and practice, and we use the paradigm's premises as an analytic tool to understand real life and to think deeply about interventions. Using the paradigm, we've developed here an ability to make theory practical and to hear practitioners talk as deriving from implicit theory and as a challenge to further theorizing. So the paradigm has 4 premises. First, poverty is a violation of human rights, manifested in 3 circles. I borrowed 2 of the circles from Ruth Lister and added a 3rd one and defined poverty as a lack of material resources, a lack of social opportunities like education, housing and health, and a lack of relational symbolic capital that is manifested in othering, microaggression, stigma, etc. These three circles have some power because they connect the most immediate experience of need of people in poverty, the need for money, with macro politics, that is the second circle, and with politics of the intersubjective or interpersonal realm of life, that is the arena where the second circle takes place. The third circle, sorry. The second premise is that people resist their poverty on a daily basis. Since our society appreciates success and outcomes so much, and we're talking about people who don't succeed to overcome poverty, they are represented in the public discourse as passive, lazy, etc., and the resistance is not acknowledged. The third premise is the epistemological. In order to attain knowledge about poverty and about specific people in poverty, one must have close relationship with the people involved. This statement implies that people in poverty do have knowledge, including perspectives and theories, and that this knowledge is essential for every intervention or policy. The fourth premise is the axiological one, that says that since poverty is a violation of human rights and people in poverty resist poverty, the aim of social workers who wish to fight this violation of rights is to stand by their service users and contribute to the success of their struggle. My students and everyone who works with the paradigm can recite those premises like a mantra because they become quite useful. The last premise is the methodological one, which is practice. PAP practice is a combination. PAP is poverty-aware paradigm, of course, yeah. PAP practice is a combination of a practice of redistribution and the practice of recognition. I'll leave it vague for now, but it will become clearer and more alive. All the premises will become clearer and more alive during the 3 days, hopefully. So, okay, never mind. So, just for the sake of our guests from abroad, before describing the development of the paradigm, let me say a few words about the context of the welfare system in Israel. The Israeli welfare system includes two large institutions. One is the National Insurance Institute, which is responsible for the allocation of allowances, some of them universal, like the child allowance or the old age pension, and some are selective, like the income support allowance, which is granted on the basis of an income test and an entitlement test to the poorest people, the ones we're most committed to. The income support allowance is tiny, and its aim is to provide the minimum necessary for very basic survival. In reality, it doesn't succeed even to provide this. The second main institution is the Personal and Social Services of the Ministry of Labor, Social Affairs and Social Services. We call it Welfare Ministry, okay, you know. Some of the senior representatives of the ministry's division responsible for... Okay. Maybe? The cat is still here? No, okay. So some of the senior representatives of the ministry's division responsible for personal and social services are here with us, Norit and Ayala, and they are very, very, very much involved, you know, in what PAP does with the ministry. They are responsible for the allocation of services for families and groups and community work. These services are provided mainly through the welfare service departments, which are run by the local authorities. Social workers in these departments provide various kinds of interventions to youth, the elderly, children at risk, people with disabilities, families in poverty, and so on. Every local authority has such a department, and these departments comprise the most generalist frontline of social work services. Because in Israel, social work is organized under a special social work law, all the professionals in those departments are licensed social workers. Work with families in poverty in those departments was always problematic. But since the 80s, the socio-political climate in Israel has changed and moved from the socio-democratic orientation of the welfare state to a liberal neo-right orientation. This transformation included an accelerated process of neoliberalization and privatization of the public sector, including social services, alongside a steep increase in poverty and inequality rates. The ratio of families in poverty is 18.6. During the last 10 years, it moved from 20% to 18.5. And the ratio of children living in poverty is about 30%. Here you can see, this is the ממוצע, the average OECD, yes, and Israel is here, okay?
Where is Belgium?
Belgium is, this is Denmark here. This is Denmark.
Great for you.
And
It's changing now, isn't it?
You can go now.
Okay.
I'm afraid it's not for long.
okay.
Belgium won.
Okay. So, these changes also influence social workers whose work has been characterized by instability and occupational insecurity, heavy caseloads of approximately 130 families for a full-time social worker, and limited resources. Various Israeli scholars have described the relationship between social workers in the social welfare departments and service users living in poverty as a difficult, conflictual, and frustrating relationship. The late Shlomo Sharlin and Michal who is with us, not here, but with us, described it as a coalition of despair. These welfare departments are the site of my interest. When I was 25, I wanted to change the world, and specifically I wanted to change the way social workers in these departments work with families in poverty. I think that PAP has been developed from this dream. I can use different points of time or different events as the starting point of PAP. So I'm moving now, okay? Some of them go back to my personal upbringing, others to my first steps in the academy or at BGU. But I won't go so far. I'll begin with casework for social change, a student program that I founded here as part of our BA program in 2010 with Nur Shim'i, and Mirit Zidi, who are both sitting here, two great radical social workers who were my students at the time. One day in a meeting, the head of the welfare department in Beersheba said, "You think you know how to work with families in poverty, so let's see. Take some students, teach them your ideas, and we let them do their fieldwork training at the department." I like this idea very much. But how are you going to choose the families for your project? You have to have strict selection criteria, they said. I said, okay, if you heard this story already, so I apologize, okay? I said, okay, we'll take families in poverty with children that you have known for years, what you call chronic families. I don't like to call them that way, but you know what I mean. No, they said. All the special projects that we have in the department use very selective criteria for choosing families. You need families who are motivated to undergo therapy, to change. They have to go through a long intake process and tests, otherwise the students will fail. At that moment, I replied with an answer that I hadn't thought of before. I said, so I'll take the families that weren't accepted into any of the other programs. We'll manage. Just ask them if they agree for a student to come to them. This decision became a principle that defined the program and the paradigm. The PAP does not assess the motivation of clients because it is impossible to assess motivation without relating to power relations. That is, it is not possible to assess the motivation. We built our practice, and what Chaim, the dean, just read is from a booklet. Hebrew speakers, if you don't have this booklet, you can have it now, And it's a booklet of small stories that students wrote with service users, and about some kind. It's a great resource, but it's just it's in Hebrew, but it's very moving and very interesting. So we built our practice on critical assumptions, So we thought how to build close relationship with families based on the understanding of power relations. Since they were not interested in coming to the welfare department, the intervention focused on family homes. The work in service users' home did not take place as part of the usual outreach, which aims to bring the client to the office within a short time, but as a way of adapting the intervention to service users' needs. We didn't aim to conduct a continuous thread of therapeutic conversations in the homes, but saw everything that happened in the encounter between students and the families as therapeutic intervention that aims to be beneficial. Since the intervention took place in the homes, the students soon became acquainted with the entire family, as well as wider circles of friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. Thus, we were able to overcome many of the obstacles that stand in the way of social workers who do not know the partners of their clients or their children. We were also able to gain a deep understanding of the reality of the family's lives, and this gave us confidence in assessing needs on the one hand and risk on the other. We conceptualized this work method as intervention in a real-life context, and Yuval phrased it this way. Another unique element of the program was its duration. Neoliberal logic seeks short and effective interventions that will rescue families from poverty. Those who understand what poverty is, how many barriers its structure produces, in how many ways it restricts individuals, and how tangled and convoluted, yes, the relationship between aides and individuals is, understand what a foolish idea this is. All this is ostensibly unrelated to the length of time students do their fieldwork, which is related to the needs of the curriculum rather than to those of the service users. In Israel, in order to receive the social work license, one must do 2 academic years of fieldwork. Each year, students are trained in a new place. In our program, we turned it into a 2-year program. It enables the students to build a kind of solidarity and close relationship with the families and to do more meaningful work together. It enables also the creation of a community of students where more and less experienced students are engaged in a process of professional development together. Another unique characteristic of the program is the understanding of the material and emotional needs as essentially interconnected. Unlike Maslow, PAP sees material and emotional needs as existing at the same time and as important to the same level. Thus, the work to provide emotional needs is not at all more important than the work to provide material ones, and vice versa. However, the social services departments do not have an effective practice of responding to material needs because the budgets for this issue are extremely tight. We had good luck and symbolic capital that enable us to raise a small sum of money, $100 or $200 per year per family. I don't know what happened with this symbolic capital now, went away because now we don't have money this year, which was available to us for various expenses. In concrete terms, this money allowed us to buy food when a family was stuck without anything to eat, eyeglasses for a child, payment of electricity bills before or after a power cut, or the purchase of basic items of furniture. Of course, this is only minimal aid, but poverty means that even a small amount of money is very important. At the symbolic level, the students' knowledge that there was some money available made them feel that they were not alone, that the problems were solvable, and that they had support when it was needed. It was a fundamental statement that the material reality of poverty is very important, and not just the struggle against poverty at the macro level or the behavioral or psychological change that people are supposed to undergo. What we didn't achieve with the flexible budget, we achieved through in-depth work on the exercising of rights. This was done with the help of the program coordinator, who helped with raising funds in the community, connecting families and informal bodies that provide resources, becoming familiar with the bureaucracy and with the practices and procedures involved in exercising rights in the formal system, and promoting policy practice. All these elements comprise the translation into practice of PAP premises and our moral and professional commitment to fight poverty and challenge the mechanisms of power. An evaluation of the program revealed positive outcomes in terms of improvement in the family situations. Strong relationships were created between the students and the families, although they were regarded very, very, beyond help. Strong relationships were created. 84% of the participants started processes of coping with debts, and 54% succeeded in reducing their debt. 40% started to work or to study in a vocational course, and another 13% improved their income from work, although we never asked them to do so, to work or to take care of their debts. It wasn't planned, it was just, it happened. 50% made appeals regarding various welfare benefits, and the third involved in social activism through the program. Processes of individual and family changes were apparent in all the families, and all of them improved a lot the relationship with their social workers. This happened very, very quickly, the improvement of their relationship with their social workers. Another evaluation of the program through the experience of the participants, that was, Yuval MA study, revealed a high level of satisfaction. Yuval interviewed 9 women participants 3 times during 2 years and found that the satisfaction derived from 4 main experiences. The experience that they become visible, the participants, that the students saw both their needs and their struggle against poverty. This was a very important experience of visibility. In addition, they felt that the students became active partners in their fight against poverty. The third was the experience of close, hierarchy challenging relationship, and the fourth was that of responsiveness to material and emotional needs. The fourth experience of responsiveness to material and emotional needs related to the importance of needs and their fulfillment in the intervention. The interviewees emphasized that the students were constantly attuned to their needs and to actively responding to them. The women described the students as dealing with material needs hand in hand with careful attunement to emotional and relational symbolic issues such as the women's feelings, past histories, and family problems. Material assistance was not confined to satisfying material needs only, but was a key component of the inner experiences of the women, who felt less isolated and less blamed as a result of the students' active efforts to fulfill their needs. Through those experiences, the people felt that the students recognized both their full humanity with their pain, agency, daily difficulties and struggles, and the limiting context of poverty with its various manifestations. Another aspect of the work in the students' program was the connection with the staff of the Social Services Department. It turned out to be a charged and complex arena, no less and sometimes even more than the arena of the students' relations with the families. Although the department directors opened the door to us and invited us to work with the families, in practice we encountered resistance. The fear was that if the students succeeded in working with families with whom the department had not been able to work before, it would indicate that the social workers had not done their job properly. The fear of being perceived as unprofessional almost prevented the possibility of dialogue, learning, and the joint examination of issues. We understood this resistance, too, as an expression of our power relations with the department. In this equation, faced with us and our academic program, the social workers in the field felt threatened. exposed and subject to criticism. Academic knowledge is perceived as domineering and threatening. Beyond this, critical knowledge is perceived as threatening the department's institutional control over its employees and the loyalty of the employees to the organization. In a sense, it would have been easier for the department to accept us if we had failed than if we had succeeded. At one of the steering committee meetings, one of the leading social workers at the department blamed me very seriously for acting irresponsibly because I was teaching the students to succeed in their work with the family. This is what she said, you know. It's irresponsible because you teach them to succeed, and they will think that they can succeed. You know, that they will think that it's possible, and then they are not. They will not be
ready to
real world.
the real life.
Doing so, I was not training them properly for real life, where they won't have the kind of supervision and other assistance that we provided. And she was right, you know, it's impossible to do it without the supervision and the assistance and, you know, however, over time, working very closely on a daily basis, even the social workers could feel that we were helping them and didn't seek to replace or change them, and these tensions dissipated? Somewhat. I discovered how difficult it can be to make a change in practice, how much patience is needed for small movements toward change. The success of the student program led the Welfare Ministry, in partnership with the National Insurance Institute and Ashalim JDC Israel, to establish the MAPA Families Meet Opportunities program. In fact, it was Norit, you know, who is responsible at the ministry to all family social workers in the departments and is here with us, told me that the work with the students is interesting and useful, but impossible to reproduce in the work of social workers in the department. And she said it, you know, because she knew that it's like, this is how my father, when he wanted me to do something that I didn't want to do, he said, it's not that you don't want to do it, you cannot do it. And here it was done, you know. So Norit knew it as well. She said that the program was successful because it involves students. And as young people, they are enthusiastic, willing to do extra work, and have open minds. The goal of the MAPA program was therefore to serve as a pilot program and to examine the possibility of implementing PAP in the work of social workers in the departments of social services. The theoretical ideas and principles that were shaped in the students' program became the activities of social workers. In the first phase, 55 social workers and team leaders from 5 communities in here in the Negev received training in PAP, and in the second phase, they began implementing the principles of the paradigm in their work. At the same time, the Minister of Welfare at the time, Meir Cohen, appointed a government committee to formulate policy recommendations to combat poverty. It was 2014. The goal was to formulate a plan to bring the poverty rate in Israel to the OECD average within 10 years. I was appointed as a member of the committee with Johnny Gall and many, many other people. The chair of the committee, Eli Alaluf, who 2 years later became a member of the Knesset, of the parliament, made an important strategic decision, which was to submit recommendations in 5 fields: housing, health, education, employment, and welfare. With this decision, the report broadened the public discourse that until then had been focused on employment as the main solution for poverty. The fact that close to 60% of families living in poverty in Israel were families in which at least one person was working made it clear that employment was not the best solution to the problem of poverty. In order for employment to extricate people from poverty, it must be quality employment. Focusing on employment as a policy tool in the fight against poverty may be beneficial if it is focused on creating employment opportunities, but in the new liberal climate, it is used to label poor people and to create policies that are supposed to turn laziness into productivity. This is a vicious interpretive circles of cause and effect, in which the cause of poverty is supposedly laziness, and when the solutions that are supposed to correct laziness do not succeed in getting people to work, this is perceived as proof that the problem was indeed laziness. The Al-Aluf Committee broadened the public discourse on poverty by expanding the scope and creating links between housing, education, health, employment, and welfare policies. It was the source of both its strength and its weakness. Since the minister who appointed the committee and was committed to its conclusions was the welfare minister, it was not within his authority to implement a policy that applied to other ministers and ministries. Some months after the report was submitted to the government decided on elections. The minister and the whole government were replaced. However, not the prime minister. However, the report did and continues to do noise at the public discourse. My participation in the Al-Aluf Committee enabled me to influence the final report and to promote recommendations in areas close to my heart, such as creating solutions for the problem of debts of poor private households, establishing centers for the exercising of rights, and limiting the size of social workers' caseloads. All through the report, it is mentioned that its aim is to establish poverty-aware policy, and these words have started to take their place in the world. In this climate, the possibility of expanding the implementation of PAP has developed. The enthusiastic responses from the social service departments in which MAPA began to operate apparently contributed to this change. I must say that MAPA, the team started to work with families, and they were supervised and are still supervised, for the third or fourth year now, by Yuval, whom you know, and Shachar, and Deinat, and Sivan, who is not here, but they're all trained and supervised, give ongoing supervision till now to the whole teams, in the field. And so at the time, it was not yet possible to talk about final results of the MAPA program, but it was clear that the social workers and their team leaders were happy with the training and supervision they had received, and that in most cases they succeeded within a relatively short time in establishing meaningful contact with families that until then had refused social services or been considered violent or uncooperative. As a direct result of the recommendations of the Al-Aluf Committee, in 2015, and because the minister then was very, very enthusiastic about having a big program that will be with his name on it, before he leaves. So in 2015, the ministry launched a big program for families in poverty, Families First, that operates in 105 local authorities. For the first time in Israeli history, there was a program that gave holistic intervention to families in such a huge scale. They treat 3,000 families. In addition, they established community centers that promote rights actualization through group and community work and serve some 10,000 applicants annually. And they did, these centers according to a model that Ronnie developed years before. This program applies principles of PAP. Families First, applies principles of PAP. The target population of MAPA and Families First were similar but not identical, as were the program's goals. Families First was aimed at a large group of families coping with poverty who had a good chance of being included in the job market and needed assistance to do so. MAPA aimed to work with families that were more excluded and could not be approached in other more structured programs. In 2016, the Welfare Ministry decided to adopt PAP as a guiding model for social work in the social services departments. At the same time, another decision was made to implement the principles of the paradigm in new programs designed to work with families in which the children are at high risk in order to prevent the removal from home. This decision was controversial. These programs did not see families living in poverty as their target population at all. On the contrary, they wanted to emphasize that there is no connection between poverty and child abuse and neglect in order to not to blame all families living in poverty, and in and as endangering their children. The fact that the programs are the result of cooperation among a number of separate services in the ministry, including those who were accustomed to see parents' pathologies and functions as detached from their context, and were used to see the best interest of the child as an autonomous entity, has contributed to doubts about the degree of relevance of PAP to treating children at risk and their families. However, after lengthy deliberations, the decision was made to adopt PAP in these programs as well. I think that one of the reasons to implement PAP was its evident success in establishing good beneficial relationships with families who were considered uncooperative and the lack of any other alternatives. During the course of 2017, social workers and team leaders from 10 communities in which the two new programs began to operate were trained in the spirit of PAP. This training included specific development of the paradigm and its training model to include the unique issues of working with families whose children are in situations of severe neglect and abuse. And on the third day, we'll talk a bit about, the pedagogy and about the teaching of PAP. The decision to implement the principles of PAP in 5 programs aimed at different target audiences led to the need for academic supervision of the program teams in order to enable a deeper understanding of the paradigm and develop its implementation in specific contexts, as well as to train many professionals at various managerial levels to work within the framework of the paradigm. In order to do so, I left my work at BGU at the university for 1 year, and from October 2016 to September 2017, worked closely with the program directors at the ministry. My mission was to develop the body of knowledge of PAP and its suitability for the needs of the field, take part in discussions at the ministry's headquarters, train social workers, mentor teams and managers in the departments in which the programs operate, and train a group of senior social workers to serve as instructors and mentors of PAP. This year, then, PAP has expanded. The student program is ongoing. MAPA program continues to operate in the same 10 teams in which it operated and is currently expanding to 5 new towns. The programs for children at risk, which we will discuss more extensively tomorrow, are also currently expanding to new towns. I carried out the training of social workers and directors in these programs with my 3 doctoral students, Shachar, Yuval, and Einat. The burden on us became impossible to bear, and last year, it was decided to initiate, the ministry with JDC and Rashi Foundation, 2 NGOs, initiated the establishment of a PAP training course for senior social workers who would become instructor in all of these communities and in courses and lectures for newcomers to the paradigm. In addition, there were courses for department supervisors, department heads, etc. The ministry is currently responsible for PAP knowledge base. In addition, we are working on writing a course book that will be used to teach and guide social workers and will also include digital films. In contrast to the student program, which developed from the bottom up, the expansion into 5 programs in dozens of communities necessitated the development of an organizational model. The organizational model includes 5 components. At the center are relationships. Can you see?
Yes.
At the center are relationships. These relationships are based on the recognition of service users' needs, pain, and resistance to poverty, and the recognition of power relations. I will not elaborate now on how exactly to create these relationships and how they develop, and what are the obstacles on the way, because it is a whole subject that needs, a 3 days or a 7 days seminar on its own. From an organizational point of view, these relationships mean that the social worker should meet the family once a week on a regular basis. For this to happen, she needs to have time and a smaller caseload. In all the programs here is indeed a smaller caseload. The next component is a flexible budget that exists in all the programs with different amounts and different modes of operation. From the clinical experience, And from studies, and it varies from 3,000 shekels, which is like $700 to $10,000, you know, the flexible budget per year per family. From the clinic, and it should be studied, and you know, and it's a whole, each one of these components, we are just starting a research, Johnny Gall and myself with Taub Center are starting a research on the flexible budget. But what I want to say is that each one of those, you know, components really needs a lot of you know, further elaboration. And from the clinical experience and from studies that are being conducted, it appears that this budget has a tremendous contribution to the sense of well-being of both service users and social workers, and creates a space in which things happen. Of course, having a flexible budget raises many practical questions: how to give, what exactly to say to the families, when to say it, whose money is this actually, the families or the social workers, what to do when there are disagreements on how to use the money, and so on. The next component is active exercising of rights. It's important to know that it's not an exercising of rights as a bureaucratic act, but as an ethical position connected with the struggle against poverty, which is, as stated, a violation of rights. Here too, there are questions of practice. What are the respective parts of the practitioner and of service users in this process? What are the links between exercising rights and therapeutic work, and so on? And we have some answers, you know, preliminary answers, because we have to answer as practitioners all the time in all those questions. But it's not written yet, and it's not, you know, and still it needs more thought. The next component is PAP training and supervision that takes place in all the programs, and here I'm proud to mention, you know, again, Yuval Shachar Beinat Sivan, who have become, you know, because we are kind of really, because I think that my implicit goal here is really to create community here, I mean, you know, with you. And I think that this is the kind of work that I do all the time with the students and with the, you know, teams that we create communities of commitment into working with families in poverty. And I think that when you succeed to do it, it's really, it's nice. And it's kind of very close relationship, you know, so that we have. So the last component is policy practice. Again, a whole topic that we cannot get into now, and Edith and Johnny write a lot about it, you know, and we learn from them and we implement what they say, try to implement, you know. And when we don't know what to do, we call them, and they... Through the years from 2010, since we established the students program, and we do a lot of policy practice, you know, I cannot go into it now, but we are very proud in our successes in this field as well. Through the years from 2010, since we established the students program, PAP has changed from a small peripheral exercise in the academia to the bon ton. It still has many opponents, both among those in the field or among policymakers at the ministry, but it is a bit more difficult to invalidate it now. However, there are also major concerns. This is the place to turn to the fourth and final part of this lecture, which addresses the challenges and questions we currently face. So, I think that the first one is the objections, you know. The story as I told it here might sound simple or linked to some of them when I talked about the students program, and to some others when I talked about the apprehensions of people in the ministry who are responsible for the children at risk. At the students program, what we dealt with was the fear of the practitioners that I, as a representative of the academia, is going to know more than them about the field, about practice. They hated this possibility and tried to protect from it. Another apprehension that was concealed within the first one was that service users would blame them, the social workers, and that we'll believe them. With the ministry, it's different. It's more ideological, but there are many, many, many objections, in fact, that we are facing now, you know, that say that poverty aware is too long, is too naive, is too expensive, and
But we are not the only one who need to cope with the poverty in Israel. We
Yeah.
are the only ministry that has the responsibility for
yeah, yeah, and other ministries should do, you know, their share, and we cannot work for them, and we should limit what we do. You know, PAP tries to do a whole, you know, holistic, to do a lot, and they say so. It's a huge struggle now. So these are kind of the objections. The second challenge is interpersonal relations as power relations. The sweeping implementation, in a way, the first challenge is how to respond to objections, and the second is how to respond to the acceptance, to sweep acceptance of the paradigm. So the sweeping implementation of PAP is in a relatively short time raises a question as to how as to the seriousness with which the ideas are received. On the one hand, it is a cause for great happiness, and it is made possible because both social workers and service users feel that PAP fulfills their hidden needs, that it is relevant to them. On the other hand, do all the social workers who say they are using PAP understand what it is? The fear of tokenism is great, and it is the fear of the distortion of ideas, the dismantling of the radical baggage, and the return to humanistic ideas that place interpersonal relations at the center, but fail to understand the influence of power relations in shaping interpersonal relationships. It seems to me that understanding the place of power relations within interpersonal relationships is the hardest thing to do. If I look at what has been happening in the field during the last 3 years, I can say that the work on exercising rights is the most easily accepted component. Although in its PAP version, it challenges fundamental perceptions regarding the need to avoid increasing the dependence of clients, as it is difficult and can be frustrating, and it is difficult, to exercise rights, and can be frustrating, I can say that in this area we have really made a breakthrough. I feel that the weaker area is the deepening of the understanding of interpersonal relationships as power relations and the attempt to challenge this. Faced with fears of the distortion of radical ideas, which the literature proves are justified, I cling to dialogue. Dialogue is my weapon. As long as professionals are willing to argue with me on the paradigm, I feel that the profession is breathing, that it is alive, that it is not stuck or corrupt, that instead of exclamation mark, there are question marks, that instead of a narrow space of evidence, there is a great expanse of inspirations, of theoretical and ethical and practical questions and dilemmas, whose purpose is always to find the best ways for social workers to be relevant to families living in poverty. I am occupied with the challenge of how to keep alive a dialogue with questions of why we do and not just what we do. This dialogue is the essence of all relationships, and it is supposed to take place at all levels. How do we maintain dialogue within the context of such structured power relations as between me and the social workers that I direct, between the supervisors and the social workers and the managers, between the managers and the social workers, and between the social workers and service users? Is it possible to maintain a dialogue and still set in motion a process and move large systems? It is clear to me that dialogue is not a word that fits the language of evidence-based studies. Does it have a right to exist, or rather what conditions should obtain for it to exist? Combating poverty. One of the major things that disturbs us is what is the connection between all of this and the fight against poverty. I have conflicting thoughts about this. On the one hand, I have always been opposed to the boastful statements that programs like to make, that they take families out of poverty, out of the poverty circle. I don't know why they call it circle, you know, to take families out of the poverty circle. I do not believe these statements, not because I do not believe that people can change, start working, increase their income, do good things in their lives. I really believe it. But I think that poverty is less connected to the behavior of individuals and more to social policy and opportunities. It produces or does not, and the opportunities it produces or does not produce. Like Avner de Shalit, I think that poverty is a product of interlocked systems and structures, and the struggle against these systems is not on the agenda for any program of securing families in poverty, and it cannot be done from the bottom up. In this sense, the fact that programs that work with families say that their purpose is to extricate them from poverty is not only a lie, but also a dangerous one, because it reinforces the perception that the change in the behavior of families will lead to their being extricated from poverty. I say again, of course they can improve their income, and they can, you know, go above the poverty line. But that's not enough for us if we know they live in public housing with a drug dealer downstairs, or that their child's teacher doesn't believe in him. Against the conservative claim, to which I object altogether, that poverty is a matter of intergenerational transmission, I would like to argue in this context that escaping from poverty must be examined in the multi-generational manner. That is, not in terms of increasing income in the present, but in terms of social mobility. The paradigmatic nature, that's the end we did. The last point I want to relate to, which is not exactly a challenge, but seems to me worth thinking about, is the importance of the paradigmatic structure. I called my method a paradigm because I wanted to emphasize the connection between theoretical and moral principles and between them and practice. Only the encounter with the implementation of the paradigm made me understand to what extent the paradigmatic structure is effective and even necessary in practice. People in the field sometimes relate to theory with impatience. The need to act requires ideas that can be understood easily and quickly. Therefore, I have encountered situations in which people want to take one element of PAP practice and apply it. For example, provide a material response or make a home visit. Or I'm asked to teach in a course that is entirely shaped by the new liberal discourse and the individualization of social problems, one lesson on poverty or one lesson on how to make connections with families. The peak of this was in an email Yuval received a few months ago from a department that asked for a lecture, where they wrote, you know, we are now many departments. Every day we get requests, come and give us lectures, you know, train our workers or whatever. And in one email they say, it is important to us that the lecture deal with the experience of the person who lives in poverty, its impact on his functioning, his perception of crisis, his abilities to this context, and less on the social struggle. In this situation, and of course I'm happy with the request, you know, it's just how to start a dialogue with this request, and you know, how to, in these situations, the fact that a few years ago, sitting alone in the room, in front of the computer, I had the idea of calling it a paradigm, saves me. I say very politely, I'm sorry, I cannot teach one class about poverty in your course, because it's part of a whole paradigm. It's part of a worldview. And we're talking about worldviews here. If you want to examine your worldview and mine, I'm glad to be with you. But if you don't, it's a waste of time. In this way, through one word that both limits me and binds me, I try to put big ideas on the table, theories. I try to formulate new rules of the game, a new rhythm, new relationships.